Hello and welcome to the Killjoy Guide, the left feminist podcast for the 99%. I am your host, Killjoy Meg, and I would like to welcome journalist Eleanor Goldfield to the show. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Sorry we couldn't do a little talk before the show. Just had to get it started.
No worries.
Just a quick shout out to some of the people. So we have Gustavo and we have Randy. Thank you guys for being in the show. I'm confused what this said. Women's rights allowed the privileged bourgeois women to frame themselves as victims and the powerless working class men as toxic members of the ruling patriarchy. I would say partially true. Like definitely, the patriarchy definitely affects all of us, guys. Like the way that patriarchy is, it's bad for all of us. Let's just put it that way. So welcome Robin, welcome Beverly. So Eleanor, it's so good to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure. So one of the first conversations that I wanted to have with you was about what is happening with the Texas abortion ban. So what was your immediate reaction to the abortion bans whenever they announced it?
Well, my first reaction was that's fascinating because the governor of Texas underwent stem cell treatment recently. So, but hypocrisy is something new for these kind of bills. I have to say that I'm not terribly surprised. 2021 has seen more restrictions on abortions and reproductive health than any year since Roe versus Wade was passed in 1973. So when you look at that, and we're not done with the year yet, right? So,
right.
When you look at it that way, Texas is abhorrent, and it's not like we should just let that slide. I'm horrified, but I'm not shocked, is how I would say that. And of course, this is really in line with the whole perspective on reproductive rights in general, which it's not about children, because if it were about children, then children would not be homeless or starving or lacking education or health care in the richest country in the world, which of course hundreds of thousands are. It's really about controlling our bodies and the rights of rich white guys over the rest of the world, basically. And so, a perfect example of this was when there was I can't remember who it was, but someone was talking about this abortion bill on Fox News and kept referring to women as host bodies, as if it's some crazy ass Alien versus Predator film. So, it's so clear how these people perceive people who have the ability to become pregnant, and the unwillingness to allow people to have control over their own bodies. So, yeah, I'd say that I'm horrified, but I'm unfortunately not shocked.
Right. I feel like we have been coming toward this for a very long time, just because not only have the Republicans been unrelenting in their attacks on women's bodies, on women's health, but also because we have seen almost zero fight back from the Democrats. Almost zero. How much momentum have you seen from the Democrats saying oh no, we had, they'll give it plenty of lip service and they'll talk about how much they support women's bodies, but considering we have people in the Democratic Party who don't support abortion and who are pro-life, the fact that contingent of the Democratic Party is being catered to, it's okay, either you're for women's rights or you're not. It's all well and good to say that you are personally pro-life, but you believe in a woman's right to choose, but you have to be willing to actually advocate for that right. You can't just say it's your personal preference, but every woman can choose. What they're getting from you whenever you have that message is, I don't believe in abortion. That's the message that's coming across, is that you don't believe in abortion, and that you're never going to support women, and you're never actually going to work hard to protect women's right. You'll give it lip service, but you will never actually fight for it.
Well, I think you just basically said what the Democrats are in a nutshell. You'll talk about it, but you'll never fight for it. I mean, years ago, comedian Louis Black said the Republicans are a party of bad ideas and the Democrats are a party of no ideas. And it's true. The Democrats only stand on we're not the Republicans. But they actually are, which is what's so funny about it, is that if you look at, the Republicans of yesteryear, like Reagan and Nixon, the Democrats are further right than that. So you can't even say that the Democrats aren't Republicans if you look at the classic Republican. And let's be clear about the Democrats. Any time in the past 40 years, they could have codified Roe v. Wade into law. They could have made that legislation at any point. Or right now, when they control Congress and the White House. That is something that they have had and have the power to do. But that's not interesting to them, because then they lose that ability to leverage that as a power and a threat in elections. And that's basically one of the only things that separates them in terms of their platform, not in reality, as I've just made clear, but in their platform from Republicans. So if they got rid of that, if they, checked that box and said, great, now abortion is officially legal, we don't have to lean on the Supreme Court, which is about as, which is about as flimsy as a toothpick. They don't want to. So I think it's very important to make that clear, because already we've seen the Democrats be like, oh, and this is why you need us. And it's like, no, this is why you're you're an abusive partner in this horrific Lifetime movie that we're stuck in. And even worse than the Republicans, because at least the Republicans are saying, look, we don't think that you have any basic human rights, so shut up and sit down. But the Democrats are like gaslighting you. They're like, no, we really think that you deserve basic human rights. And then they turn around and they don't do anything about those basic human rights. So in a lot of ways, I find the Democrats a lot creepier than the Republicans. The Republicans will stab you in the stomach, and the Democrats are back there, the trying to kill you with 1,000 paper cuts behind your back. So I think that it's very important that we not look to the Democrats to fix this problem. This is a systemic problem that goes back to the founding of this country, that's founded on genocide, slavery, and of course, patriarchy. And this is something that, while we see neighbors of ours decriminalizing abortion, we are criminalizing it. And I think that this is something that both parties have had a hand in, and it's very important to recognize that.
Right. And let me bring up this article from NPR real quick. That way everyone can kind of, for those who aren't aware of the entire breadth of what exactly is happening with what happened with the Supreme Court and with the Texas abortion laws. So this is from NPR. That the Supreme Court has upheld the Texas abortion law, basically making all abortions after 6 weeks. I guess is a heartbeat bill is what you would probably call it. So the U.S. Supreme Court Wednesday night refused to block a Texas law that amounts to a ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. What really ultimately means is 4 weeks after pregnancy and 2 weeks after a missed period, because most women don't know that they're pregnant until 6 or 8 weeks into their pregnancy. The vote was 5-4 with Chief Justice Roberts. And the 3 liberal justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Breyer, dissenting. Decision has left open the option for abortion providers to re-challenge the Texas law in other ways in the future, meaning that the case possibly or even likely will return to the Supreme Court, though not for months or longer. The opinion was unsigned. It said the abortion providers didn't properly address complex and novel antecedent procedural questions, which I don't even understand what the hell that means. But so in reaching their conclusion, they stress that they do not purport to resolve definitively any jurisdictional or substantive claim in the applicant's lawsuit. In particular, this order is not based on any conclusion about the constitutionality of the Texas law, and in no way limits other procedurally proper challenges to the Texas law. So, in other words, like, they're saying, okay, you guys can proceed. We're not actually going to rule whether or not your law is constitutional or not. Because I don't know if they just don't think that this particular law is the one that's really going to overturn Roe. But I think one of the major parts of this law that I find really objectionable is this part right here, is that because the established procedure for challenging a state law is to sue officials charged with enforcement, the Texas state legislature wrote the law instead to put citizens in charge of enforcement. Specifically, the law allows anyone, without establishing any vested personal interest, to sue clinics and individuals alike for aiding and abetting abortions performed after 6 weeks. So this is a abortion vigilante law, basically, in which citizens are going to be the judge on whether or not someone has gotten an illegal abortion, which I think is just grotesque. And, you know, it is just, I think that's the only word that we can really use to describe it. It's just grotesque, because you're just having, what's to stop someone from saying, you know, oh, they had if someone had a miscarriage, like, no, they had an abortion, because maybe this is going to become a witch hunt, a literal witch hunt. Not, you know, the Me Too type of witch hunt, but this will become an actual witch hunt in which women will be basically brought up to be served a false justice.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Me Too wasn't a witch hunt. That's holding men accountable for,
exactly.
for harassing and accosting women, which, by the way, is protected under this law. So technically, let's hypothetically bring up a really, you know, grotesque situation. Trigger warning for people who are survivors here. A father could rape his daughter. And if she then becomes pregnant, he would be able to get $10,000 by turning her in for having an abortion. And that is literally, rape and incest are not cause for exclusion under the Texas law. So literally the scenario that I just said would be totally legal. So I think like that there's so much grotesque about this law, right? And that's, of course, a big part of it. And I think that, you know, the whole witch hunt thing that you mentioned is, of course, disgusting. I think one of the things that makes me love the internet is the fact that so many people have trolled that website, which has made me so happy. That they've had problems with you know, getting the site working properly, because so many people have, you know, sent in like pictures of Shrek or whatever, like as their, you know, as their explanation of who's breaking the law or whatever, what have you. But I think that, you know, the whether it's spamming the website or whether it's, you know, donating and working with organizations that provide abortion care, whether that's telehealth or whether that's Plan C pills or what have you, these become vital in the fight that we're in right now. And of course, I think that we should continue to legislatively fight these things. But let's be honest, we're in the United States, and the courts are not on our side. Are being like the 99%. So I think that it's really important to find other pathways and support those other pathways at the same time, and, you know, make it very clear that you will never stop abortions. You know, I myself have had an abortion. There was never a question whether I was going to have one. The only question was whether I could have access to a safe one or not. And there are people who call in to telehealth lines and say, look, I'm in my kitchen. What can I drink? In the cabinet, like, I've got bleach. Will that work? And so I think, like, the bottom line is that you can never stop people from taking control of our own bodies. We will always do that. The question is whether it's something that you can do safely, so that you basically recognize the human right to autonomy over self. And of course, at the same time, the issue of the patriarchy and the fact that marital rape was legal until very recently, and survivors are consistently not believed, regardless of what Me Too has done, which I believe has been significant. But the continued protection of these predators, and that includes those making this legislation, the protection of these predators over the rights of people who demand autonomy over their bodies is grotesque, and it has to be stopped in a myriad of ways. So legislatively is, of course, one pathway, but I think, again, we have to recognize what we're dealing with here, and the court systems are not on our side. And so the Supreme Court has never had to speak to answer to the American people. We don't elect them. They are a wholly undemocratic institution. They don't give a damn what we think, because they don't have to. They're set for life. So I think it's important to recognize that regardless of what happens with Roe v. Wade, we have to be prepared to protect the rights of human beings to have autonomy over their bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like, as you were saying about, like, the analogy that you brought up of, a father, raping his daughter and being able to then turn his daughter in if she were to get an abortion for, rape and incest. Like, the fact that a rapist, even now in Texas, you could rape somebody, get her pregnant, and even if she were to charge you with rape and you were to get off, you could then sue for custody of that child, and after it's born, and say that now your rape victim is now attached to you for life. So all of this is about is just control, and it's never been about protecting women's, protecting children or anything like that. Because as you said, like, if we actually cared about, protecting children, we would be caring for those who are already living. Like, how many children are living in poverty right now, or who are suffering in the foster care system, and so on and so forth, or even all the women, particularly women of color, who are constantly being policed and have their children taken away from them. That's a conversation that we never really have, and why I think it's so important that we don't talk about this in a pro-life, pro-choice dichotomy, but really in a reproductive justice framework, in which we're talking about a woman's autonomy to, she can have kids if she wants to. She can not have kids if she wants to. And whatever children that she does have, she should be able to parent them. Like, when we consider it that way, something like Black Lives Matter is also a reproductive justice issue, because these are children that are being murdered. These are the children of mothers who are being murdered in the streets. So that they should be able to provide a safe environment for their children. So that is something that we don't really discuss as well. But you don't see that in any of these conversations about the fact that all they care about is the control of women's bodies and the control, basically, of our, sources of reproduction. And, especially when we don't have, just certain ways of, maintaining a way of taking care of our children, whether it's through free healthcare, free education, decent maternity leave or family leave, a living wage, like all these sources of social reproduction that completely are ignored, and because they're considered part of the market, clean water, things like this. All of these things could benefit women. If you want women to keep their pregnancies, we should be looking to enforce some of these things of being able to have women, be able to raise their kids, but a lot of it's so much about, it's about control of women's bodies, and it's about control of labor, considering we need to have a larger labor force. So what's a better way of having a larger labor force than keeping women from having abortions?
Yeah, and I mean, well, and to a certain extent, the labor force isn't even that important anymore, because,
right?
I mean, about 1 million people have died of COVID. The government doesn't care at all.
Yeah.
So it really is about that control aspect and ensuring that we remain broodmares for the state. And this is something that again goes back to the founding of this country. That is exactly the point. Women are supposed to stay home and pump out kids
Mhm.
in their own sort of form of a factory floor, right? Your body is a factory for creating, uh, you know,
Mhm.
as George Carlin said, we need live babies to make dead soldiers, whether that's
Yep.
soldiers or whether that's workers or what have you, whatever it is to in order to prop up the state. Now, I think the labor force is less important today than it was, during the age of industrialization, because let's be honest, we don't need people don't need to be working as much. We could have these lives of leisure that people dreamt about in the late 1800s. A 40-hour work week is just absurd at this point. That's what they were asking
Mhm.
for in the late 1800s. So the fact that that's still what the paradigm is absurd when there's so much automation and that there's very little need for us to be working at these quote unquote BS jobs, because we're no longer like I think 1% of the population is actually involved in growing food and doing things that you actually need to survive. The rest of us are moving numbers around on a screen or what have you. And I'm not knocking people who enjoy their jobs, but a lot of the work that we do is a lot of the labor that we do is really quite unnecessary, and it only exists to prop up the capitalist system and those structures of oppression, which of course include the patriarchy as well. And so it's really just, and you spoke about the intersection of so many issues. Absolutely, because when we're talking about the issue of reproductive health, the concept of creating the next generation and the
Mhm.
inability to make the decision as to whether you want to do that or not.
Mhm.
That is the next generation, and that really is it feeds into to every other issues, the climate, and you mentioned Black Lives Matter. Well, there have been myriad studies showing that, for instance, in Black and brown families, having a member of the family incarcerated, whether that's a parent or an uncle or an aunt or what have you, greatly affects the physical and mental health of the children in that family. But you don't see anybody stopping people from being locked up for selling a plant or for stealing a sweater or what have you. So yeah, the intersections with regards
Mhm.
to reproductive health, I mean, they're all there. And I think that, this is another great example as to why it's important that on the left we not stay in our silos. All of these issues are connected. The climate fight is
Mhm.
connected to reproductive justice, which is connected to Black Lives Matter, Indigenous rights,
Mhm.
all of these, the anti-war. I mean, again, all of these things are intricately connected and really come back to the inability to have basic human rights under the current system of colonialist capitalism
Mhm.
and patriarchy.
Right. And I think it's also helpful to mention, like, just how racist, abortion laws like this are, just because these laws aren't intended to, you know, protect black babies or anything that, you might see on a billboard or anything like that. That's not what these laws are intended to do, because historically, birth control and abortion, they have been prevented in order to not stop black women, Latino women, other women of color from having babies. That's never been the point, because historically, like, we can talk about the Mississippi appendectomy, which is basically a forced hysterectomy against a woman of color. That's
Mhm.
what it used to be called. It was a Mississippi appendectomy, and women of color have historically been forced have had sterilization forced on them, because, as Steve King so not so eloquently stated, is that we can't create a civilization with other people's babies, which is just a grotesque thing to say, because, and that's one of the reasons that they try to prevent abortion and prevent birth control, is not to stop women of color from having babies, because they'll find other means. Like, there is happening right now on our border with forced sterilization happening. Women of women at the border forcibly being given hysterectomies without their consent. And this has happened throughout history of the United States. But preventing birth, stop getting rid of birth control, getting rid of abortion, has always been to prevent white women from having abortions, because they want white women to have babies. That's the whole point. They want to continue the white race. So when you really consider it, these abortion bans are incredibly built into white supremacy. I keep on seeing trolls in here. like there's one here saying men built this world. On whose backs? On whose backs did you build the world?
That's just not true.
No, it's not true at all. Because, this world would not exist without women. How would you be able to continue the human race without women?
Well, women are so much more than our ability to bear children. So just the idea that, because I shy away from the argument that you need women to continue the world because we bear children. No, you need women to continue the world just because you need women. You need all of the genders. I would technically agree with George Carlin that we should, create an island where we just put all these quote unquote men and just watch them, give them a bunch of whiskey and PCP and just watch them kill each other. I'd be totally down for that. And stream it on live television. I'm there for that any day of the week. But this idea that just men built the world, that's dumb, for lack of a better word. But I also think, Black women and women of color, and not certainly not to mention Indigenous women, are disproportionately affected by this because they already have an extreme lack of access to reproductive health care. So I would definitely say that there's white supremacy in terms of, historically wanting white women to have more babies. But I would also say that this will force a lot of women of color to have children that they don't want because they already don't have access and they won't have the ability, if you're just obviously there are poor white women, there are plenty I'm one of them, but white women statistically have more ability to travel. They have more, access to funds to travel to a different state to access an abortion or something like that. Whereas Black and women of color and Indigenous women do not. And so I think, it's very important to recognize that aspect of it, and also recognize that, for instance, Washington, D.C., where I live, has the highest maternal mortality rate in the country. It's worse than Iraq, which is really quite impressive. And most of that affects women east of the river, which is a predominantly, Black and brown neighborhoods. And so if you are a Black or brown woman living in Washington, D.C. right now, you have a pretty good chance of dying in childbirth, which sounds ridiculous in 2021 in the richest country in the world. And it absolutely is. But this also, again, this is about not caring about the lives of Black mothers. And so they're fine with, at this point, they're fine with, these women of color having children, but they don't give a damn if they die in childbirth. Because obviously the statistics show that Black and brown women are significantly more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman in the United States. And eugenics and that whole thing plays a huge role historically. Women who were locked up for quote unquote having hysteria, which is just this catch-all term for, being a human being who's being wronged and you get pissed about it, and that's hysteria. They were sterilized, and there have been so many articles and so many books and really powerful stories that have been shared by women who have had this done to them, and how incredibly, awful and traumatic that is. And this is not these are women who are still alive today. So this is not something that happened, and of course you mentioned what's going on at the border, but this is something that's happened very recently to women who have been deemed, unfit to have children based on some bogus some bogus psychiatrist or psychologist saying that you're hysterical. So yeah, I think that there's absolutely a race aspect, but these kind of bills in 2021 will disproportionately affect Black, Brown, and Indigenous, or BIPOC people, because they have already less access to resources, and don't have the ability to are less likely to have the ability to travel in order to get that, or to have the funds to access Plan C pills or what have you. Just on the whole, having less access to those basic reproductive rights.
Yeah, sorry, give me just 1 second. I just have to send a message. Sorry. Trying to get an exterminator in here. But had to get rid of some, had to exterminate some trolls. Anyway, so what do you feel that, because we've already talked about how the Democrats have basically been useless in, combating what's happening with these abortion laws. But what would you say, what do we even have a counter narrative that because that's one argument that I heard from someone I interviewed very recently, was that we don't really have a decent counter narrative for why we should, for how we can combat, because there's whenever it comes to the right, they have only one thing that they say, and that's that it's abortion is killing babies. But it doesn't seem like we have a decent counter narrative to really combat that. And that's one of the reasons why we are seeing so much of really a backlash ever since Roe v. Wade was put into place. So how do you feel like we have a decent counter narrative, or do you feel like we're not doing enough?
I would say that that's not true, because it's actually a small minority of the country that's against abortion. It's just that they're really loud, and they have a lot of supporters in our government, because our government is the patriarchy. So it's actually if you look at statistics, if you look at polling, the vast majority of people in this country don't give a damn if you get an abortion or don't get an abortion. They don't care. And so actually, statistically speaking, we have the numbers. So it's actually, I think it's important to note that, because it suggests that Roe v. Wade is not in danger from the greater populace of the United States. It's in danger from the people who hold the strings of the system. So I think that's an important thing to note. But it's always been that way, right? Like the powers that be never wanted to give us a 40-hour work week, never wanted women to vote, never wanted to end slavery. But popular opinion, and then the movements that pushed that, forced their hand. Woodrow Wilson is the guy who was a total ass, who finally signed women's right to vote. He didn't want to. It just became untenable not to. So it's very important to note that difference, because actually the majority of the United States thinks abortion should be legal, and actually law, not just some Supreme Court. So I think that's really important to note that, because we actually do have the numbers on our side. And the counter argument to that, the BS that this is no, it's not. And even if you let's say that you were even just looking at it from a very cold and calculating the statistical perspective, where are they on the census? Where are they on getting Social Security? Where are they on paying taxes? Has anybody asked a fetus to pay taxes yet? Where are they on any of the things that a person gets or has to do. So, this, even if you're just looking at it from that perspective, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. Secondly, a cluster of cells is not a person. And you just ask a scientist. They're walking among you. Ask a scientist if a cluster of cells equals a functioning human being. It does not. Now, granted, you could argue that a lot of people that are making this argument are just a cluster of cells and don't have a damn brain between them. But that's more of a philosophical argument than a cold scientific one. So I'd say that, you definitely have the scientific evidence. Seriously, just, look it up. That, this is not killing a child. What's killing a child is homelessness, war. We bomb children every damn day. Where are your crocodile tears for them? A woman deciding, or, a pregnant person deciding that they want to terminate a pregnancy vis-a-vis, getting rid of the cluster of cells that are forming in their body is no more your business than whether they have had more than one period. Because guess what? You can actually have a period after an egg has been fertilized. So does that mean that any woman who's had more than one period is a serial killer? I guess it does. So there's no scientific or even just regular logic behind the argument that you're killing someone. Mm-hmm. What you're actually doing is you're killing someone by ensuring that they don't have the ability, that the actual person doesn't have the ability to decide what they want to do with their bodies, because pregnant people are much more likely to die in trying to access an abortion when they can't do so safely. They're much more likely to hurt themselves in a way that could cause death. So, yeah. I think, that whole argument is BS from any angle that you look at it. And as someone who has had an abortion, I have not killed a child. And in fact, I'm pregnant now, and this pregnancy would not be possible were it not for the access to reproductive health care that I had some 10 years ago. And so I think it's really important to recognize the difference between a fetus or a cluster of cells and a human being. And this is why, Texas governor included, if y'all want to go back up your bud there, maybe you could call his office and ask why he was getting stem cell treatment. If you're so convinced that that's a human being, then dude just killed a human being so that he could get some BS treatment for whatever it was. I think it was actually COVID or something related to that. So yeah, I mean, just any way you slice it, the whole you're killing a human being is absolute BS. And it's just a continued way to demonize people who make the choice of having an abortion, who make the choice of taking control of their bodies. And this is something that goes back, hundreds of years. You can take herbs to end it's really quite ridiculous to formulate this as something that's new. People have been doing this for thousands of years in order to take autonomy over their bodies. And there's been that understanding, which is why you could definitely make the argument that we're devolving as a race in a lot of ways. That people have always known, and predominantly it's been women in the community who have held this knowledge of the herbs you need to support a pregnancy, the herbs you need to end a pregnancy, the herbs you need to basically be a healthy person in control of their body. And that is something that seems like it's just newly, in the past, since the advent of this country in particular, has become a hill that people want to die on, as vis-a-vis an abortion is killing someone. But for hundreds, if not thousands of years, it has not been. And so it's just it's ahistorical, it's non-scientific, and it just speaks to the continued argument of a patriarchal, to be perfectly honest, dumb, not intelligent system that needs an excuse, and needs an excuse that will pull at heartstrings. It's the same thing with what we've seen, with why we have to have troops in Afghanistan again. Oh, the women. Oh, really? You care about the women? That's why you've spent 20 years ruining their country and creating 4 million refugees, you sick bastards. But all of a sudden, we care about Afghan women.
Right.
And so, I mean, they always need some story to feed people, to pull at heartstrings, to make them care. And with this, it's been that, oh, you're killing a human being, but that's just not true. And people have known this for so long that it's not true. And so once again, the US and, you know, these legislators and, you know, the people that support them are proving how dumb the United States can be, both with regards to historical information, but also with regards to science, which is right there, and telling you that this is not killing a human being. So again, from any angle that you want to look at this this topic, that's dumb. It's a dumb argument to make.
Right. And kind of going on with your point about, you know, like the way that they talk about it within a medical sense, you know, like trying to bring up like embryologists saying like that that life begins at conception, which is not true. Like whenever they talk about like the heartbeat, you know, at 8 weeks, that is not actually a heartbeat if you actually understand the medical understanding of what that is, because there is no heart that has developed yet. There is no actual heart, so there cannot be a heartbeat if there's no heart that has developed. Like, as you said, it's still just a cluster of cells. What is actually being noticed is just an electrical pole. That electrical pulse that is saying, you know, there is the ability for a heart to form. There's an ability for a fetus to form, but that thing, it has not developed yet. You could, like, how many women do we know who have had miscarriages within their first or second trimester, even into their third trimester have had miscarriages? Like, just because there is the ability to have life doesn't mean that life will actually form. And even when you so we can just debunk so many of these different things, considering how many Republican men do we know who have paid off their mistresses or their wives to go off and have abortions. This is not about their, you know, proclivity for life or family values, because they don't actually support any legislation that would actually help families.
Right.
Like a living wage or free healthcare or free education. They don't give a shit. This has nothing to do with family values. And even in the Bible, it does actually have, if you want to make this biblical as well, there are arguments in the Bible that are pro-abortion. Look them up. Look up Bible and abortion. You will find that there are parts of the Bible that are pro-abortion. Look it up. You will find it. So every single time that they have one of these arguments, it's just, okay, that there are so many good counter arguments for that ridiculousness. And it's just goes to show that this has nothing actually to do with women, with children. It's all about control. It's about controlling women's bodies, making sure that in keeping women in poverty, especially considering how many women do we know who have children that they can't afford to have and end up living in poverty or end up having those children taken away. You know, and so it's, if a woman decides that she wants to have, you know, if she wants to, you know, complete her pregnancy, that's up to her. If she wants to have that pregnancy continue, that is up to her. But no woman should be required to carry a fetus that she does not want. If either she feels that she can't afford to have kids, or she doesn't want kids, or it doesn't matter what the hell her reason is. If she doesn't want that kid, she doesn't have to have it. She does not have to continue that pregnancy if she doesn't want to continue that pregnancy. Because pregnancy is so much labor. People don't understand how much labor actually goes into carrying and, you know, carrying a child to term. They don't understand unless they've actually gone through it. Like, especially men, if you can go, you will never experience it. That's one of the problems with all these arguments from men. You will never experience that type of labor. Never. You will never experience that type of labor. So you have no room to talk. All you give a shit about is control.
Well, and I think, I mean, there are a lot of women that will never get pregnant.
And that's true. That is also true.
So I think, I think the ability to get pregnant it's not really the issue either. It's that if a guy, let's say that a guy wants to walk around, with his with a fake pregnancy belly, and he wants to get a bunch of tattoos and a bunch of stuff put in his, like a bunch of earrings and great, go ahead, do your thing. You want to chop off one of your legs? I think that's a questionable idea, but go ahead. It's your body. I don't care. If I want to have control over the rest of my life, of my life, this is the same argument that Kavanaugh made as to why he should be Supreme Court Justice. Well, I don't think a mistake that I made when I was 17 should affect the rest of my life. But you think that a person who has sex when they're 17 then gets pregnant should have that affect the rest of their life? When that was consensual, but you raped someone? Okay, riddle me this, you sick bastard. Like, it's just, I mean, the whole thing is just like so absurd, right? And the whole thing is based on this really tight web of hypocrisy. And again, dumb shittery. Like, it's that the whole thing is based on extreme ignorance and arrogance about that ignorance, like pride in ignorance.
Right. So I'm gonna bring up this just to bring this up, but women can shut that down, right? Conservatives, a good old Todd Aiken.
Yeah, I mean, I think
don't even understand how women's bodies work.
Well, right, and I think I think it's really important to. I completely lost my train of thought. No, you're fine. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's kind of what I've been saying the whole time, but it's nobody's business why you have an abortion. And to be perfect, like I'm 6 months pregnant. I've had a very easy pregnancy, so it hasn't been a lot of labor for me. Thank you. I've had it really easy. Like, I haven't even, if it weren't for the inability to tie my shoes, I wouldn't even notice that I'm pregnant. So for some people, pregnancy is super easy. For some people, it's horrible. And that really wasn't a decision that wasn't what I based my decision to have an abortion on 10 years ago. For some people it is. But again, that's none of my business. And my abortion is none of their business. If you want, again, like, if you want to tattoo yourself, if you want to get pierced, it's none of my business. It's your thing, not mine. So again, it's like the ability to have autonomy over your body, regardless of your gender, is incredibly, it's like the basic foundation of human rights. But as I mentioned, like with Kavanaugh, it's not he feels that he not only should have the right over his bodily autonomy, but other people's, as a rapist, as a white man. Like, that is his perspective. I do not only have the right to have power over my body, but I have the right to have power over yours, whether I want to have sex with you or whether I want to ensure that you become pregnant. Either way, whatever the case may be. And that is the true foundation. It is not about, it's the same thing with like LGBTQ. I need to know what you're doing in the bedroom. Well, that's creepy as shit, dude. Why do you care? That's disgusting. Why? Like, whatever people are doing, that's their business as long as it's consensual. Like, it is absolutely absurd, that this it all rests on the same, again, like the same like web of hypocrisies, the same web of lies, of control, of patriarchy, of white supremacy, the need to have control over what people are doing. You shall only do missionary position, and you shall only have sex to become pregnant. And if your husband chooses to rape you, that's his prerogative as the man. Like, this has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with anything but that right to control other people's bodies and other people's lives, right? Which is another reason why they really think they're so threatened by LGBTQ because, to be honest, who has fewer abortions than, gay couples? When a child is brought into their lives, it's because they definitely wanted it. So you think they would make natural allies, but they're not, of course, because it's about this. We need to control it in this very specific, narrow way. And of course, another thing that highly diminishes abortions is birth control. Mm-hmm. You should see Republicans and evangelicals handing that shit out on street corners. Like, hey, anybody need a condom, pills, IUD? They should be like trying to mandate that if they were so anti-abortion. But of course they're not. So and that's why I also completely decry.
And you never see them. Yeah, and you never see them policing male sexuality either. Like, you never see them saying, like, men, have less sex. Men, what are you doing? Like, stop being such sluts. Like, no, it's all on the women. Like, men can have as much sex as they want because men can't get pregnant. Yeah,
well, and men have the right.
I want to bring this up, too. Like, so thank you, Crony Ursa, for the $4.99 super chat. What do some mean when saying selfish and not wanting kids? Selfish to who? And again, that goes back to bodily autonomy, that people don't want others to have control over their lives. So they'll call them selfish for wanting to have control over their lives because that means that they don't have control.
Well, and it's also the idea again, like that we're broodmares for the state.
Right.
And like one of the viewers said, men built this world. There is a shit ton, like, just speaking from scientific progress that wouldn't have happened without women, who, by the way, didn't have access to institutions, so they had to learn that shit like on the sly, like in the dark, because they weren't allowed to know it. And that's just one tiny sliver of an example, right? You can go back to like ancient Sumeria and talk about this shit and then bring it all the way up to today. But I'm guessing if you make that comment, you don't even know what ancient Sumeria was. But again, the idea that women are only here to procreate is so, like, I'm so sick and tired of hearing that, like, people would say that to me, like, oh, why don't you want kids? You would have great kids. And I'm like, because that's not my job. My job on this planet is not to procreate. And the reason that I'm now having a kid has nothing to do with me thinking, oh, I gotta do my job. No, that's BS. The reasons are completely different and they are my own. But the idea is that, like, women should not be a mind. They should not be a soul. They should not be a spirit. They should not be something that can build a better future with our ideas and our contributions outside of what comes about from between our legs. So this is, again, it's like a woman should not, or a birthing person should not be anything but that birthing vessel. And the threat to the patriarchy is when we actually say, oh no, but I have a brain and I know how to use it. That is terrifying. And that's why people say, oh, you're being selfish, because it suggests that our only role in society is to pump out kids. Again, like that sort of capitalist factory paradigm. And so, the next time somebody says that to you, just throw that right back in their face.
Right, and that's one of the unfortunate realities of why patriarchy is so enmeshed with capitalism, is because we are ultimately seen as, sources of reproduction and as, means of production. That's all we're meant to do, and that's one of the problems with capitalism and reducing us all basically to our labor and to our means of production and reproduction, is that we're only seen as, that cog in the wheel. As you said, women are part in society is being the production of other human beings, and that's it. Like, our labor is not seen as anything else, but just being as caretakers for, being the caretakers of social reproduction and also the producers of new workers. And that's basically it. And of course, for centuries, we were seen as property, and our children, that whatever children we bared, were not our property. They were the property of, the man who was the father. Like for centuries, women had no right to the children that they bared, none. Like everything that a woman had was given over to the husband, including our children. We had no right to them whatsoever. So that just goes to show that, again, we are only seen as the means of production, but we don't even have ownership of our own children.
Well, yeah, and I mean, ownership over children sounds a bit creepy.
I know. Oh yeah, I agree with that.
But yeah, I mean, it's I mean, it's still a problem because statistically speaking, women make less money, so they are less able to get out of a situation that might be dangerous to both them and their child, because men get paid more than women. So I think this is a problem that perpetuates to this day. Obviously, it's not as bad as back in the day when you could literally buy and sell women. Like wives were oftentimes sold to pay off a debt. So we're not quite there, but we have a really long way to go. And I think one of kind of like wrapping up a thought, like, one of my favorite quotes about so-called Western feminism comes from women in Rojava, which, if folks aren't familiar, that's in northern Syria. It's Kurdish. Well, it's not just Kurdish areas are not just in northern Syria, but Rojava is, and it's this phenomenal. If you're not familiar with it, please look it up, because it's this amazing community. These amazing communities that are actually feminist, and what I mean by that is that there's this drive to banish patriarchy and banish capitalism, which is inherently patriarchal. And there was a lot of like hullabaloo about Rojava several years ago, and like Rolling Stone did a thing about them and everything, and they kept talking about them like, oh, they're like Western feminists because we want to say that we're so progressive. And one of the women who had been interviewed, and these are like badass fighters who are literally like holding their towns against ISIS, which, by the way, the United States is like both funding and trying to fight and losing at a game of solitaire. But so they were talking about this, and they're like, it's really annoying that Western media keeps talking about us like Western feminists. Your societies are not feminist. And I just love that slap back, because it's like, yeah, no, we are not. And at the end of the day, it's like, it doesn't matter if you've got a female CEO of Lockheed Martin. The fact that women are also capable of murdering children and bombing innocent civilians is not feminist at all. So really, the idea that the United States, or really, Europe, or any quote unquote Western nation has the handle on feminism is really, really messed up and just vehemently incorrect. And of course, these laws, these bills against reproductive rights is just one example. But circling back to an original point that you made, this flows into all other issues. So our societies are inherently anti-feminist, and the only way to make them feminist is at the very base level to recognize our right to our own bodily autonomy. But then also, you have to stamp out patriarchy and capitalism entirely, because you cannot have a feminist society when those issues are still very much at play. And of course, by that I also am including colonialism and white supremacy. These things are also inherently anti-feminist. So in order to actually have that feminist society, you have to banish all of these concepts.
No, 100%. And I think that is what we need to understand as, being intersectionality, is that all these, as you were just mentioning, like, in order for us to have a feminist society, we have to get rid of capitalism. We have to get rid of white supremacy. We have to get rid of colonialism and imperialism. Because if we still have all of these systems, then, intersectionality is not just diversity. And that's the thing that people get so misunderstand, is that it's not just seeing, a person of color in a high place. That's not what intersectionality is. Intersectionality is getting rid of all these systems that are oppressing everyone, and that people are at the margins of these different intersections, but we're all being oppressed, just in different ways, because we're all patriarchy, capitalism, imperialism, white supremacy, that's all one. They're all one thing. They're all interlocking. And in order to get rid of one, we have to get rid of all the others. You can't get rid of white supremacy if you don't also get rid of patriarchy and capitalism and imperialism. You can't get rid of imperialism without getting... these are all interlocking. We can't do one without getting rid of the others, as you so eloquently stated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know you have to get going. Real quick before you go, can I just get your reaction to one tweet? Because I have a feeling you're going to have a strong reaction to it. And let me make sure I have the right one here. Oh, where did you go? Oh, wait, your reaction to this one from Jill Filipovic. Good work, everyone who voted for Trump or Jill Stein in 2016, or who didn't vote, or undermined Clinton from the left because the Supreme Court doesn't really matter and it'll be fine. Abortion vigilantes in Texas, thank you for your support. Do you have any reaction to Jill Filipovic?
Sure. I'd say look at history. I mean, recent history. I mean, also, like, you could go back to just how the U.S. looks at third parties in general. But yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about that, but predominantly that blaming people who refuse to vote for an imperialist, white supremacist, sexist, racist, warmongering ass, which is both Clinton and Trump, by the way, and Biden. Blaming those people is it's completely it's completely irrational. You're basically blaming people for standing up against systems of oppression, and you're also looking at things that are just totally factually inaccurate. To suggest that Jill Stein stole the election is just as dumb as saying Russia stole the election. It's just as dumb as, suggesting that there's a Santa Claus. These are all as factually inaccurate as each other. And all you have to do are look at the stats. But something that I've found to be the case with Democrats, and I mean like diehard Democrats, is that they have something that I like to call fact fear. The people that I spoke to in 2016 didn't want to know anything about Hillary's platform. They didn't want to hear it. They only wanted to know that she wasn't Trump. Same thing with Biden. I don't want to hear about his platform. I just know that he's not Trump. Well, that's insane. That's literally insane, because you're voting for a rapist. In the case of Hillary Clinton, you're voting for the protector of a rapist. Bill Clinton had been on Epstein's jet more than any other human being. So it's sad, because these people could be allies in the fight for progress, but instead they are drinking the Kool-Aid and they are propping up the systems of oppression that they supposedly are trying to dismantle, which is why I feel that Democrats in a lot of ways are far more dangerous than Republicans. Because like Republicans, again, they're the ones who, let's just take climate change, for instance. They're the ones who are like, it's not happening. So they're the ones that are like in that scary movie where there's like a serial killer in the house, and the Republicans are like, no, there isn't. So they sit down and have some popcorn. The Democrats are like, absolutely, there's a serial killer in the house, and they sit down and have some popcorn. Which reaction seems more concerning to you? I'd be way more concerned about the second person, because I'd be like, dude, and you're still gonna sit down and have popcorn? That's fucking twisted. So again, it's like, the Democrats to me are far more terrifying in a lot of ways than the Republicans. And so, whether that be trusting their Democrats in an election year or trusting them to do anything about Roe v. Wade, it's dumb, because they could have done something in the past. Like I said earlier, they could have put that shit into law anytime in the past 40 years when they had control of Congress and the White House. They chose not to. What is your response to that? Whatever your name is on Twitter. But again, like I will say this as a kind of a closing remark, and much love to people who hang out in the Twitter sphere, but I will say that real change is not going to happen arguing on Twitter, because the real change has to come from grassroots organizing. So don't and I'm saying this as somebody who has gotten sucked into Facebook and Twitter arguments in the past. The The real work happens when you sit down with people and you talk to them and you do the grassroots organizing, you do mutual aid. It's not as sexy as, having some like sexy slap back on Twitter, but it's far more useful. No one has ever convinced someone that they're wrong on Twitter. I just have never seen that happen. So I think instead, like, let's have these conversations, which are difficult. It's like having the conversation of Zionism, as I'm Jewish. This is a really hard conversation for a lot of Jews to have, but we can't have it online because that is not going to work. We have to have this conversation over the Sabbath dinner, or we have to have it over, a conversation about Passover or whatever the hell. And by the way, happy high holy days to my fellow Jews out there. But like these are conversations that have to happen offline, because the way that we humans are wired, arguing online is just like total. It's total candy. There's no nutritional value to it, and we have to build a future that really is based on these connections. And so, I would sit on a porch and have a beer with this person, although I don't think they'd want to have one with me. But, I've sat on porches with people who voted for Trump, and I've talked to them about why they voted for Trump. But I couldn't do that on Twitter. There would be no way to enter into a conversation on a human level. So I think I think it's important to have that as like your primary focus, and then the Twitter can be like that bag of candy that you go to and argue about whether someone actually knows their historical facts or not.
I think that's all very well said. Granted, I do think that the Democrats should hold some accountability for what is happening, and I don't feel like they are. I think that's one of the big problems with what Jill is saying, is that it is the problem of non-voters who have been disenfranchised, and feel like there's no purpose to voting. Okay, and more people didn't vote in 2020, or I'm sorry, 2016, than voted in 2012, and they have no accountability for that whatsoever. It's like, okay, so what exactly were you putting up that was really any different? And we can talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg not stepping down during Obama's term, and we can have all these conversations, but as you say, it's really fruitless unless we're actually having those conversations and talking about nuance rather than just spatting at each other.
Nuance, and then the fact that, like, why don't we talk about why the hell the Supreme Court exists? It's
also
like
a good question.
It's the most undemocratic institution. I mean, it's less democratic than the fact that England has a queen, because the queen doesn't actually have any power anymore. But our Supreme Court, which is not elected by the people, which is basically, chosen in back doors with dudes drinking whiskey and smoking cigars like they're on the damn Titanic, that you think that that's worth upholding? Tear that shit down. Like, we're having conversations about the wrong thing. And also, yes, the Democrats, again, could do a lot about the Supreme Court, but they don't want to, because they're not progressive. So again, if you're putting your faith in the Democrats, you might as well put your faith in Santa Claus. And I actually think that would work out better, because there are, in fact, people that dress up as Santa Claus and give out presents. The Democrats do not give out presents.
No, 100%. And as you say, your analogy of the person sitting on the couch saying, like, oh yeah, there's just a serial killer in the house, and doing absolutely nothing about it. And it's like, as much as, the Democrats want to say, like, oh yeah, climate change is real. Okay, climate change is real. What's the next step? Or you're like, oh, I believe in a woman's right to choose. Okay, great. What's the next step of that? You can't just say it and do nothing, because that's just doing nothing. As you say, like, that's you sitting on the couch eating popcorn, even though there's a serial killer in the house.
Yeah, psychotic.
So, all right. So I know you have to get going. So, where can our audience find you? What can we support from you?
So all of my work is at artkillingapathy.com. That includes my documentary, which came out last year about West Virginia. It includes my music, my poetry, and articles that I write. So you can find that stuff there. You can also reach out to me via artkillingapathy.com as well.
All right, I'll put that in the chat. Art Killing Apathy.
Yep.
All right, so you guys can go there and check out Eleanor. All right, definitely you guys stick around. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with Time's Up, but I know Eleanor's got to go. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Eleanor. It's been such a pleasure having you.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
You too. All right, okay, guys. So our next story that we're going to talk about is, so let me make sure I can find it. I have a few different things up here. Sorry, guys. But Eleanor is pretty awesome, so I'm definitely glad that she came on. Alright, let me find that next story. Alright, I guess I'll just go with this link here. Alright, so as we all know, or as some of us may know, I don't know if everybody knows. So Time's Up very recently got caught. A lot of the leaders who were part of Time's Up were involved in helping Andrew Cuomo to it became a catch and kill, and they were helping Andrew Cuomo and basically guiding him in how to defeat his, particularly silence Lindsey Boylan, and which is just disgusting. And after this was revealed, a lot of the board members of Time's Up were forced to step down, including Hillary Rosen, Tina Chen, and others. Most of the board has now been basically dissolved. There is a lot of them has left Time's Up. And another thing that has happened is that the LA Times has scrubbed Tara Reid from Time's Up report, and it's been claimed that Hillary Rosen secretly discredited Tara Reid. So let's look a little bit at what's happening in this article. So it says the New York Times appears to have stealth edited a report about the turmoil of pro-women group Time's Up, scrubbing any reference to Biden accuser Tara Reid. On Saturday, the paper published an article on the exodus of the Time's Up leadership that has parted ways with the organization following the revelations that its top officials were secretly aiding Democratic New York Governor Andrew Cuomo as he began facing allegations of sexual harassment. Among those who resigned include Democratic operative and CNN contributor Hillary Rosen. The report referenced Rosen's apparent efforts to secretly discredit Reid, a charge that's been levied by Reid and her backers. So the Times originally wrote, supporters of Tara Reid, who alleged that President Biden harassed her in 1993, have claimed that Rosen worked behind the scenes to discredit Reid and other women who have accused powerful Democratic men of wrongdoing. Rosen wasn't immediately available to comment on the group's announcement made in the statement on its website Saturday. And I'm really quite surprised. So Hillary Rosen is gone. Tina Chen is gone. It says also that apparently Rosen had spoken to, let me rephrase this. Some have criticized the involvement of Rosen, who is vice chair of the powerful Washington, D.C. Public Relations from SKD Knickerbocker and a high-profile Democratic operative. And so as this member of the PR firm, and so the report listed financial transactions between SKD Knickerbocker, the PR partner for the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, and the Biden campaign during the 2019-2020 presidential election. So basically saying that this PR firm that Hillary Rosen worked for was a partner of the Time's Up Legal Fund and of the Biden campaign. They're the PR partner for Time's Up Defense Legal Fund, but also they had financial transactions with the Biden campaign. So they were donors to the Biden campaign. So a lot of this is just really messed up and just it continues to show the collusion not only between Time's Up and Andrew Cuomo, but the collusion between Time's Up and the Biden campaign, which also Anita Dunn, who was a spokesperson or one of the advisors for Biden's campaign, was also someone who was involved in SKD Knickerbocker and in the PR for Time's Up. It was one of the reasons why Tara Reade's case wasn't able to get any public relations aid whenever she came forward and was speaking out, was trying to get Time's Up, the help from Time's Up in order to go up against President Biden, or then candidate Biden. So, as it says here, last month, the Washington Post reported about Rosen's alleged involvement in shielding Andrew Cuomo and supporting Time's Up decision not to issue a statement responding to the sexual harassment claim made by Cuomo's first accuser, former aide Lindsey Boylan, when Fox News reached out to the group for comment back in 2020. So she is very heavily involved in a lot of what is happening. And let's look at what it says about Reade here. Reade, who wrote the memoir Left Out, When the Truth Doesn't Fit In, about her experience coming forward with her assault allegation, was one of 8 women who came forward in 2019. So one of 8 women who came forward in 2019 to accuse the then Democratic candidate of inappropriate touching when she worked for him as a Senate staffer. A year later, Reade revealed her sexual assault claim on Katie Halper. Oh, I hate it when it jumps like that. Why must it do that to me? Okay, a year later, and Biden denied the claims before going public. Reade sought help from the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund in January 2020 to help defray the cost of public relations and legal fees. However, while the organization offered attorney referrals, she said they denied her funding, citing concerns that could affect its nonprofit 501c3 status, as her allegation is against a politician actively running for office. Which, honestly, is, as we all know, is just complete and utter horseshit. There's no reason why, if they can go up against Kavanaugh, there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't have gone up against Biden. The only reason that they didn't go up against Biden is because they were actively in the process of colluding with Biden. SKD Knickerbocker was providing financial assistance to the Biden campaign. Anita Dunn, who was working with Time's Up, was on the Biden campaign. This was corruption, this was collusion, and it was designed to silence Tara Reade, and it was designed to silence Lindsey Boylan. Who knows how many other cases came forward to Time's Up and that were basically caught and killed. We have no idea. This is one of the problems with an organization like Time's Up. And we can't also not forget what Rose McGowan said about Time's Up, the fact of its relationship with CAA, the Creative Artists Agency, the talent agency, that not only had pocket agent, or pocket talent, who they would use to bring girls and women to Harvey Weinstein. They were involved in the sex trafficking. CAA was involved, and the CAA became the home of Time's Up in order to shield itself. So all of these things, absolutely. What Robin's saying here, Time's Up was a honeypot. It became, I don't know if it was designed that way. I'm sure it was created with all the best intentions, but that's not what happened. It became a catch and kill organization that stopped a lot of these accusations from coming forward, including Tara Reade's. You can disagree with Tara Reade all you want. I don't care if you disagree with Tara Reade. I really don't care. The fact of what happened to her is completely wrong. What happened to Lindsey Boylan, the fact that Hillary Rosen and Tina Chen and the leadership of Time's Up, is a good thing that they're gone. Because they were actively helping Andrew Cuomo to go against Lindsey Boylan and the other accusers against Andrew Cuomo. What they were doing was absolutely abhorrent. It was abhorrent. And the fact that Time's Up came out of the Me Too movement, the fact that Me Too, sorry, I got a little passionate, I had to, give me 1 second, let me rephrase what I was trying to say. As I got a little... Sorry, guys. But so... As much as... Maybe the fact that the Time's Up came out of the Me Too movement. Like, you guys know how I feel about Me Too, and you guys know how I feel about as a survivor myself. And the fact that Time's Up basically used the momentum of Me Too to become an organization, and I'm sure that a lot of the people who were involved in Time's Up, I'm sure they had good intentions. However, there were clearly people who were involved in Time's Up who did not have good intentions. That's what's clear to me. There were some people who did not have good intentions. They were involved in Time's Up to cover up their own dirty deeds. And they used the organization to protect predators like Andrew Cuomo, like Biden. And we cannot defeat patriarchy. We cannot defeat sexual violence. We cannot really end rape culture if we are upholding systems that are directly involved in harming women. And so when we are voting for people like Joe Biden, who is a predator, we are upholding that system. And that's what these women who are involved in, these Cuomo-sexuals and these women who are involved in Time's Up who are protecting Joe Biden and Andrew Cuomo, I'm sure they think that they are doing the right thing. But what they are doing is upholding the systems that oppress us all. Like, I can't say that Time's Up was co-opted or what. Like, I don't think, unless I took a deep dive and really understood what Time's Up really was. As far as I can tell from hearing it from people like Tara Reid, from Rose McGowan and others, I can't think of it as anything other than a catch and kill. It's an organization to catch these cases and kill them before they can gain momentum. Maybe that's not how it started, but that's certainly how it is now. Particularly against powerful Democratic men. And this is what's so problematic too, guys, is that we have to understand that sexual violence is not it's not a Republican thing, it's not a Democratic thing. There are always, as long as people hold power, they will want to abuse that power. There's a reason why there's that phrase, absolute corruption corrupts absolutely. Because as you are gaining power, it's so easy to practice power over. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. There is no power with in this situation. And that's one of the absurdities of Time's Up, is that they marketed themselves as a power with organization, but really they were a power over organization. And that's what's really so sad to me, is that as Graz says here, they are complicit. These cliques are complicit, make them wealthy, give them a platform, no excuse, off with their heads. And that is absolutely the truth. Like, they are 100% complicit in this. And I don't know what else to really say about it other than that they are 100% complicit. And as long as we have people who are, again, maybe celebs, but let me bring up this other comment from Fancy. Oh, sorry. Hey, Jean. So weaponizing identity politics is what the Dem Party and their ideologues do, and some people on the left do so well. Alyssa Milano was fine ignoring the inconvenience. And that's absolutely true, because we saw that whenever she reacted to Tara Reid, whenever Tara Reid's story came out. You know, that she was perfectly fine, you know, continuing to support Biden rather than actually standing for any principles that she claimed to have. And, you know, as Rose McGowan, you know, very clearly stated, you know, her husband worked for CAA. So her husband was just as involved in what was happening at CAA as any one of these other actors. So, and these are, you know, this was an organization that, you know, was involved in, you know, a lot of the trafficking, particularly for Harvey Weinstein, and we could argue that they're just as complicit in what happened to Rose McGowan and others. And what continues to happen in Hollywood. Like, this is not just a Harvey Weinstein thing. And the fact that, and the Dems are just as much complicit in that as well. Like, Ronan Farrow was very clear in Catch and Kill. Speaking of more Catch and Kill, Ronan Farrow was very clear that Hillary Clinton refused to give an interview to Ronan Farrow unless he dropped the Harvey Weinstein story. So yeah, she is the husband of a rapist, but she's also complicit with Epstein. She's complicit with Weinstein. So she is by no means, I would, by no stretch of the imagination, call Hillary Clinton a feminist. By no stretch of the imagination. Any one of these sisters of patriarchy, to borrow a phrase from Mary Barfoot, these sisters of patriarchy who gain power and then use it to have power over other people, but then try to claim some type of support from other women. You know, there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. They want to claim that, but they don't want to walk the walk. They will talk the talk, but they don't want to walk the walk. And I will never call these women feminists. Because they're not fighting for the betterment of all women. They're just in it for their own power. As long as they have power over, we will always have a problem. We need to be building a society that has power with. And as, you know, Eleanor and I were just talking about, you know, you can't dismantle patriarchy. You can't dismantle white supremacy. You can't dismantle imperialism and colonialism without dismantling capitalism. You just can't do it. If we really want this to be an intersectional movement and do our best to create a society in which this happens at least less, then that's the movement we need to be building. We need to be building a truly intersectional movement that's going to dismantle and abolish capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism, and patriarchy. Alright, let me look at a few of... Feminism is holding everyone in the light and empowering. That's true, like, empowering everyone, not just a certain segment of the population. That's one of the reasons why I say, you know, feminism, and as, you know, I get that from Bell Hooks, you know, feminism is a movement to abolish imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. Because we have to empower everyone, not just a certain segment of the population. What? The erotic thrillers? I don't even understand what that means, but... Oh, Lord help me. Like, if you don't vote Dem, you ain't black. Oh, Jesus. Oh, boy. I think we're at the point where we need to prioritize the anti-war movement over domestic feminism. The feminist thing really gets taken over really fast by really rich women. I tend to agree with you, Blue Moon Red Wine. I do think that there's still utility in the feminist movement, and I just actually did 2 really amazing interviews that you'll probably want to check out. One with Jessica Crispin, who wrote the book Why I'm Not a Feminist, and also with Sarah Benet Weiser, who wrote the book Popular Feminism, or Empowered Popular Feminism, Popular Misogyny. I just had those 2 interviews this week, and they'll be coming out later in the week, so definitely look forward to that. Because I do think that there is utility in the feminist movement in, you know, drawing attention to women's issues, but a feminist movement needs to be in conjunction with an anti-war movement, with an anti-racist movement. All these movements we all need to be working together. Like, we can't just have a feminist movement. We all have to be in solidarity with one another. And all these movements need to be working together in order to actually create the change that we want to see. We also include dismantling speciesism by ending our use of animals, period. I would love to get to that point. I mean, obviously, I'm not a vegetarian. I'm not a vegan. I do eat meat. I will cop to that. I do eat meat. I like chicken, but I do think that there's a sustainable way that we can still eat meat. But that's definitely a conversation that we can have. But I do argue that there is a way that we can't. That's complicated. It's complicated. Welcome, James. I'm glad that you were able to play foosball. I'm happy for you. Financial capitalism destroys industry is a debt economy. You're 100% true, but I mean, that's just capitalism. That's not financial capitalism. Financial capitalism, that's just capitalism. Where Pilgrim. It's very disheartening because Time's Up suckered up so much energy and momentum from the movement. 100%. I definitely agree with that. And whenever, it's so sad because whenever I see things like this, it really, like, it breaks my heart because you guys know I'm such a hardcore feminist that whenever I see shit like this, it pisses me off. It really does. It makes me so angry. Because, you know, this is a movement that I care about and that I want to see do well and I want to see thrive. And when shit like this happens, it makes the feminist movement look bad. It just does. And it makes me so angry. I don't even know what else to say about it. It just makes me so angry. Yes, I'll agree with that. Animals are our fellow beings. There are many conversations. And I agree with that. I do. And this is also a good point, faint signals. Like, it's pretty simple, Meg. Why would we live a life harming others when we don't need to? And you're right. You're absolutely right on that. In Beverly, capitalism is only one economic model, like socialism, communism, Marxism. Well, Marxism is a commentary, is a critique of capitalism. Marxism isn't an economic model. Marxism is a critique of capitalism that's used to understand why capitalism doesn't work and why we need to move to either socialist or communist system. But Marxism itself is not an economic system. But all of these are equally corruptible by toxic nationalist Roman inducted minions. The occult must go. I mean, I definitely agree that they are corruptible. I think that's one of the reasons why they need to be as decentralized as possible. Let's see. U.S. has a financial economy. China sticks to industrial economy to provide shock therapy and trap up financial engineering. Okay, I think I understand what you're meaning. Yeah, I would agree with that. That we are definitely much more of a finance. I think that's what you mean, a finance economy. Like more built on like Wall Street. I think that's what you mean. Versus like industry. Yeah, that makes sense. Meg, give an example of capitalism with a level playing field, the first mandate in capitalism. There is no level playing field in capitalism. Meg, what time you will get there. We love you, Annie. Thank you. I'm trying, you guys. I'm doing my best. Let's see. And if you eat meat, make it make it humane. Oh god. For a second, I thought you said make it human. Which mean like eat the rich. Oh, this is a funny one. Guys, don't worry, we'll have a woman president soon, and then everything will be better for women, like Obama with black people. Insert sarcasm. True story. And I got into that in my conversation with Dr. Benneweser. So definitely check that out whenever I publish it. I think they mean that they are all market systems. What we need is demarketization of our system. Well, I mean, even in like socialism, there's still, okay, yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I mean, there's still, I don't know that you can necessarily have any society that doesn't have some type of markets. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. Socialism is science. Good point. Oh, this is also a good point, Lost Adult. Anarchism is actually another model that is partly understood. That is true. Anarchism is very much misunderstood. It's because basically people just think anarchy is chaos. And that's not what anarchy actually is. You're right on that. Anarchy is definitely a system that is as decentralized as you can possibly get. I think I missed this one. Like, maybe I would love to have a conversation with you. I talk about imperialism and veganism on my channel. Cool. Yeah, DM me. Send me what your channel is. I'll check it out. I didn't know you had a channel, though. That's really cool. And generational wealth wins everything in capitalism. 100%. That is absolutely true. Well, I would disagree with you on that. Social sciences are not science. They all suffer from the replication crisis. I would disagree with you on that as someone who studied the social sciences. Because the social sciences are basically, they're analyzing the social rather than the economic. And understanding how humans work and why we do the things that we do. and trying to understand the human experience. That's what social sciences are. So, I mean, I would just disagree with you on that. I think there is a science to social science. Let's see. But yeah, I guess, I mean, if you are going to do, if you're going to eat meat, just eat the rich. Oh, thank you, Beverly. It's her channel. Okay, her channel is her handle. Okay. I will check that out. I thought the rich tasted like fat cats. That's funny. Alright, I think we're basically all caught up here. I don't think I see anything else really. Yeah, so thank you to Robin for always helping out. And thanks for coming out and joining us. Yeah. You definitely support the show. I have looked down on the Chiron. I do have my Ko-fi.com/the Killjoy guide that you can support. Also Patreon.com, the Killjoy Pod for bonus content, including access to my Discord server and shout outs. And also I have a book club that I want to get started. So there's definitely things that you can get involved in if you want to support the Killjoy Guide, but also support FHL as well. Go to Ko-fi.com/FHL Network to support Fred Hampton Leftists. So things that are coming up. So tomorrow we have Nerdolitics. And on Nerdolitics tomorrow we're going to have an awesome panel to talk about whether or not Batman is a cop. So definitely come and check that out and let us know your thoughts. Is Batman a cop? Yes or no? I say yes. That's my personal opinion. But we're going to have a great panel. We're going to have Franco on, Best from a Lensplaining, and also Chris. And we might have Nico. I need to double check with that. We might have Nico on as well. On Tuesday, I'll be releasing my interview with Jessa Crispin, who's the author of Why I'm Not a Feminist, and we discussed her book and those ideas. And then I also just did an interview with Dr. Sarah Beneweiser about the economy of visibility and how that relates to popular feminism and how certain feminisms circulate in the media. So definitely look forward to those two interviews coming up. And obviously, just keep up with whatever's going on at FHL, because you know there's always something going on at FHL. So, all right, guys, this has been a great show. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to Eleanor for coming on and talking to us. This has been a great show. All right, guys, so this has been the Killjoy Guide, the Left Feminist podcast for the 99%. And I will see you, Killjoys, next time. Love and solidarity, guys. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another video. See you, Killjoys, next time. Let me